Hello, book lovers, and welcome to the E-Train Talk Summer Book Club. I hope you've all had amazing summers so far and have dived into some exciting new stories, and that includes And Then Boom. That's our book club book today. I'm super excited to discuss this beautiful story with all of you. I got my popcorn. I'm excited to learn what all of your thoughts were and opinions. And yeah, I hope you as teachers, authors, and book lovers haven't really experienced the sort of summer slide when it comes to reading, because the only slide we'll be going on is the book loving slide. And what's going down here, it's just an amazing book club with some wonderful book lovers, all of you. Um, so yeah, in about a half an hour, the author will be joining us for some quick Q&A time. So get your questions ready. Start jogging your brain about that while we're talking about And Then Boom. And yeah, let's do this. So I have a few discussion questions that can get us into the groove. If any of you have questions for me, if any of you have questions for the entire group, feel free to share. I don't know exactly if Lisa will be able to make it exactly 5 o'clock. She may be coming a little bit earlier, maybe a little bit later, depending on her schedule. But I know she will be here. No doubts on that. Yeah, so my first question for all of you is the protagonist of And Then Boom. His name is Joe. He found comfort in the company of his grandmother. However, she passed away, which led to a whirlwind of emotions, specifically grief, that fell over Joe. So, loss is such a profound theme in middle grade books, and I'm curious to know what do all of you think? How do you think And Then Boom portrayed this topic? What are some pros and cons? What do you think could have been done better? Was it perfect? Anybody can jump in.
Well, I thought it was great. I think that you're right. It is a very common theme in a lot of middle grade literature, from Charlotte's Web up to, current stuff. It reminded me a little bit of Louder Than Hunger, that special relationship that the protagonist had with his grandma. And I thought Lisa Fipps did a great job with it. It's tough. Loss is tough at any age, but as a kid, even more so. So I think that kids will feel seen if they read about it and they know that other people are struggling too.
Absolutely. I love the parallel between Louder Than Hunger and Then Boom. That's a great point.
I thought the author did a very good job portraying what grief feels like. I think there was one point where Joe had caught a big fish and he couldn't wait to tell his grandmother. And then he remembered that he wouldn't be able to tell her because she had passed away. And then also how he treasured the quilt and would go to the bag that the quilt was stored in to kind of get the scent of his grandmother. I thought that was very touching and relatable.
Anybody else want to jump in? Okay, yeah.
I really like that his friends knew to protect the quilt, and also the saving of the plants, this one tried to throw away.
I was just going to add that his friends didn't know how to support him in that specific time of grief, but they knew what was important to him. And so they were able to support him in their own way, even though, of course, they had no training. They weren't really letting the grown-ups in on it. They just knew how to be a friend in that moment.
Absolutely. All right, nobody else wants to jump in. The next question that I have for all of you is, at one point in the story, Joe and his grandmother, they're forced to live in a car. How realistic did the storyline feel? I mean, we know of people who have to live in their car. How do you think, I guess similar to the last question, how do you think Lisa Fitz portrayed it? And do you think we need to see more on house themes in middle grade, or do you think there's a good amount already?
Well, I'll go ahead and start again. I think we could use more, but I do think that more and more are coming. There's a little bit of a trend of it right now, from How to Steal a Dog a few years back, and up and I just finished, what was that one about Hank Hooperman, the 10th mistake of Hank Hooperman. Yeah, that was a wonderful one too. And now, and then boom. And I think there's a lot kind of coming up. And it's hard for me to say because fortunately my past, I haven't been unhoused. I haven't lived in a car, so I don't know if it's realistic. But I still, how it was portrayed, I think it was portrayed very well. And like I said before, I think that that there are unhoused kids, obviously, and they need to see themselves too in literature. I think a lot of kids tend to think that I'm the only one, whatever their issue is, whatever the problem is. I think they just kind of internalize it and think I'm the only one whose life isn't perfect. Everybody else is fine. And books are a way to help kids learn, or at least start to learn, that they're not the only one. So I think it's important, and I hope more books show up.
I think Vicky's right. It kind of normalizes things. And I like, definitely the term unhoused rather than homeless. And I mean, it really can happen to anyone. I know at the start of the book club tonight, I mentioned Hurricane Beryl here in Houston, and many people, because they were without power for 7 days, even had to go live in their cars and turn the air conditioning on for a while so they could charge ventilators and respirators and telephones. So I mean, it's something that you might not think it ever happened to you, but it can, and I think it does normalize it.
And looking at it from the other perspective, you don't know what you don't know. So it also gives insight not only to the grown-ups who've been fortunate enough to not have to deal with that, but for kids who are that same age, who, even if they don't know that they know somebody who's going through that, to just be a little bit more sensitive, or at the very least feel a little bit more grateful for what they do have, what they are able to kind of count on or take for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just one of the other like demonstrations that books really teach empathy. And like, you don't really know what somebody's going through. And when you read a book like And Then Boom, you might not know that one of your friends or a kid in your school might be unhoused, but you grow to be more accepting if you eventually learn that they are, or you might like maybe catch up on cues a little bit better.
Or it can be one of those passion projects where now, hey, I have a goal and I want to fundraise for this, or, I want to raise awareness for this, whatever it is that, kids are able to do.
I wanted to mention his teacher, which isn't exactly an answer to the question, but I know that those kind of helpers exist. People that just sort of know that things like this are going on. Kids are going hungry, kids are going without clothes and stuff. The closet that she had, and I just really love that teacher. I come from a family where my mom is a teacher, and just I love that there was that side of it, that compassionate side.
I really like that too about Mrs. Swan, the teacher. I know some schools have school counselors and maybe social workers to kind of help with children who might have these other needs at school besides academic. But I thought it was really wonderful. And I like the part where I think Joe had won a contest or something, and she told him to go to the closet to choose something. And he reached from the top of the shelf and got the toilet paper. And she meant, well, no, the bottom, is where I have the prizes. But she allowed him to take the toilet paper.
Absolutely.
She made sure to say, take a prize too, which I think was so compassionate, because it's like, I see you have this real need, but I also want you to feel included. Have a kid a kid prize too.
Definitely. Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in? All right. So, once again, if you're just joining us, the author Lisa Fipps will be here to answer some questions if any of you have them. So keep those on your mind. And my next question is, okay, actually, maybe a bit of a show of hands. Have all of you finished the book? Or maybe virtual hands as well if you have your video off. All right. So this I don't have to say spoiler alert. It is a bit of a spoiler alert. Well, it is. Anyway, Joe is eventually welcomed into a new foster home, and for the first time, he feels safe. And the future, it might not be known, but at the moment, he's found a loving family, and maybe they might not feel like family yet. He feels like he's at home. That he has people that care about him. And I guess, do you think that this was a perfect ending? And you can be completely honest. Do you think this? How would what did you envision what the ending would be when you were reading the book?
I don't know if I had a specific, here's what I think the ending's going to be, but I think it's a very hopeful ending. It's still very much up in the air, but I do think it's hopeful.
I like how he was able to take Lucky the dog, and then the two puppies with him too. That the people were out on a farm and they had other animals as well.
I assumed that he would end up with a foster family, um, and that's what needed to happen. Um, and looking at the family where he landed, it's a tiny bit rainbows and unicorn. It's a tiny bit like too good to be true, or so so wrapped up. But I feel like he'd been through so much in this book, between the grief and the hunger and the hurricane. It's like Lisa really didn't pull many punches. So to give him that at the end, it's like, yeah, this is a really nice foster family. You can keep your animals, and there's these other animals, and you're going to be okay. It's like the kid sort of deserved kind of rainbows and unicorns after everything he'd been through. So
Right.
I liked it, and I liked the gentle introduction of this new family, and the was the dad who said, let's give him time to get adjusted. Like they were good foster parents, like they were good at that. And so I think, yeah, it was a little over the top, but I feel like the kid deserved it. I mean, she really put him through heck. So yeah.
Yeah, Joe went through so much, and I mean, it might have been a little bit rainbows and kittens, but he needed that. He deserved to kind of find peace, to feel safe, and he needed sort of like a perfect family. Like you said, he went through heck.
And it's good to know that there are foster families like that out there.
Right.
We about the horrible abusive foster families, including one of his friends had to go through. But there are these wonderfully generous families that are really good at, helping a new kid in, and taking care of their mental health and stuff. So they exist as well. So that's good to know.
Yeah, I agree that foster situations can be good. I know a number of foster parents, families that have taken in foster children, and they're absolutely wonderful families. I don't know that I would necessarily call it rainbows and unicorns for a kid that that doesn't have a guardian and he ends up in foster care. I think that is pretty realistic. And there are a lot of great situations. I think just if she would have said something like, well, now everything is going to be fine and he lived happily ever after, that's kind of a cliche. But going into foster care is not necessarily a cliche. That's going to be tough too. And he's still going to have to deal with everything that's happened to him up to this point. So I was rooting for him, the whole time. And I was so glad that he found the dogs, and that, he had something, the dogs to care for. And so I really wanted that for him. I think cliche might have been if his mom and dad reunited and came together and took him home again, that might have been a little bit over the top and cliche. But going into foster care, that can be tough, even when it's a wonderful family. So
Right.
I thought it was a good ending.
Yeah, and he has so much trauma that he still has to process. I mean, it could be years, even if he has this perfect foster home, it could be years until he really like feels safe, he feels at peace. So even with the perfect home, still has so much he has to learn about himself and so much to deal with.
It's true.
And who knows if his mom's gonna come back? She's been in and out of his life. She might come back and like track him down and like want to be in his life and do another upheaval. So there's still, not rainbows and butterflies.
And Jody, that kind of reminds me, like earlier in the story, Joe talked about um, playing with the Jack in the Box and how his mother coming back into his life, it was always like a surprise. And sometimes he was worried if she did come back.
Yeah, and speaking of the mother potentially coming back, that seems it like we were talking earlier about the 10th mistake of Hank Hooperman, like the parallels between that and then Boom, and that happened in 10th mistake of Hank Hooperman. So you never really know, and that's what I love about stories in middle grade because they have a sort of happy ending, but there's also so much more to learn, even if it doesn't end on a cliffhanger. There's so much more to the character, so much for them to learn and to experience. All right. I'm hoping we can get through every question that I have for discussion before Lisa gets here, but that'll be pretty soon. So don't rush any of your answers. Um, so my next question is: I'm sure most of us have read and loved Ellie's story or Lisa's story about Ellie, the main character of Starfish. Starfish won Michael L. Prince honor, and it's also a novel in verse, just like And Then Boom. It's a beautiful book. If you haven't read it yet, then I highly recommend it. So for those who have read Starfish and of course read And Then Boom, did you find any similarities between Ellie and Joe, and do you think that they maybe would get along if they ever met?
One similarity for me is sort of the problematic mother character. And I think Ellie's mom is obviously much different. But she can be hurtful, even if it's unintentional. Um, so that complicated parental relationship. And Ellie was supported by her dad, just like Joe's supported by his grandmother. Um, and they both have a connection with animals. So there are some similarities there.
Yeah, I would say I read Starfish so long ago, but I do remember the book, and I just remember liking the character so much, and I also like Joe a lot. I think they both have a good heart, and um, they're trying to fight through things um, and figure out how to survive and push through childhood under pretty tough circumstances. Very different ones, but pretty tough ones. So I I really liked both characters a lot, and I was just rooting for both of them the whole time.
Absolutely, yeah. I also think while there aren't necessarily a lot of similarities in their situations, I um I mean there are not necessarily they're not going through the same things is what I mean, but I think that eventually they could what so I know Ellie meets a therapist and she helps Ellie sort of deal and sort of become a better person and like stand up for herself. And I feel like maybe Joe doesn't necessarily need to stand up for himself right now, but I do think with the trauma that he's gone through and I mean he was in a tornado and he almost he lost his grandmother who he really trusted. I just think that he eventually might have to go to a therapist and he might learn about himself just like Ellie did, and might become just a bit stronger in a sense.
I mean, I think he would definitely need some kind of counseling. I mean, he has, his mom issues. I mean, and she abandons him like, frequently. So that, and then losing his grandmother. I don't know if he ever really actually got over. Well, I shouldn't say get over that, but I don't think he actually worked through that trauma because he was just trying to survive from day to day. So I don't think he actually worked on that. And then to, be, I don't want to say thrown into this family, but so and then the trauma on top of it is the trauma from the storm. He would definitely need some counseling, because he doesn't feel, I don't know if the word is secure. I mean, he was just, surviving, and there's trauma in that as well.
Something else I thought was kind of interesting is that both of them kind of struggled with food, although albeit very differently. Joe, he struggled with hunger, and trying to have enough food and find enough food. And then, Ellie and her food issues. Kind of a different struggle, but a similar topic. So.
All right. So, my next question for all of you, if no one else says anything, anybody wants to jump in. Speak English is hard sometimes. Anyway, my next question is, when it comes to picking out a new book, especially for kids, well, we don't like to admit it, but books can be, and most of the time are, judged by their cover, especially at a library or a bookstore when you haven't already, planned on reading it. If you're just picking out a new book, you don't know what's gonna come. So, that being said, what were all of your personal opinions about the cover of And Then Boom? And what do you think the cover tells readers about the story?
I thought the cover was really clever. And I think it tells readers that this is going to be about a boy main character. And it sort of has that comic book feel. And I did think that there would be more, like maybe he was into comics or was an artist or something like that. But I just think it's so eye catching. And the same with Starfish. I think Lisa's been really lucky with her book design, and I think both, just put a feeling, like you can feel the pressure that's on Joe with this cover, and you can feel the freedom in Starfish of this, this young girl who's, she's not skinny, but she's free. So I think they've been really, really effective covers in my book.
I thought it was a very appealing cover too. I think it would draw kids in. But then I also like how the author in the story talked about the and then boom moments where something happens that changes everything. So I like how she, related the story back to the cover.
We have a very special guest in the waiting room. A very, very special guest. Let me admit her right now so she can hear her own proper introduction. Hopefully it's the right Lisa. Everybody, we have the amazing Lisa Fipps, the author of And Then Boom, here to talk about her story and answer any questions that you have. Yes, a round of applause.
Hey there, how are ya?
Good, how are you? I'm super excited that you could make it.
Yeah, I've been writing all day, so forgive the no makeup kind of look here I got going.
Well, I'm sure everybody has questions for you, so we can get right into that. Virtually raise your hand, or Zoom raise your hand if you have a question, or like in person, yeah.
I have a question, Lisa. What are you writing?
I'm working on book 3. Yeah, book 3 is coming out early-ish 2026, and so it's due August 1st. So I'm in the last week of crunch time. Yeah, but it's about dementia.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
A lot of, I bet, it's a kid's book? Is it a middle grade also?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I bet a lot of kids have grandparents who are dealing with that. So that's a great topic.
Yeah. Thank you.
I have a question. Hi, Lisa. Thank you for being so wonderful. Before you arrived, there was some discussion about, we don't know, maybe Joe's mother would come back and, cause issues. I'm just wondering if you ever thought about that and what your thoughts on that might be. Do you envision her coming back in his life, causing a problem, cleaning up, not ever coming back?
Like in a sequel or just in my head?
I would say both, but I'm thinking just in your head too.
No. I think it would be more likely that, as obviously they're going to be searching for her, right? I mean, because she's abandoned a child, she's got some charges from before. I would think it'd be more likely for the government to find his dad, maybe. Because I pictured him maybe being in the military. He just took off from her. Maybe not necessarily Joe, and maybe he didn't even know about Joe. Who knows? So I don't know. There's some options.
Interesting.
Yeah. But I like the Davises. I want him to stay with them.
Hi, Lisa. My name is Susan. I wanted to tell you I really enjoyed Starfish that I read a while ago, and then Boom. And I was wondering what gave you the idea to write And Then Boom. I loved it.
Um, I like. How do I want to put this? For me, as a writer, it's hard to make it truly authentic when it comes to emotions if you don't personally have some kind of ties in. Well, I grew up in poverty. I had a very dysfunctional home. Um, you get a little bit of what that was like with my mom and Starfish, but I had, some other issues going on in that home that I haven't really talked on. And then my grandmom was my person, so she was who I could go to and just be completely loved and accepted just as I was. And so I always kind of dreamt that maybe she would take me in, but she died when I was really young. And that's why it was so hard for me to let go of her because, she was my person. And so a lot of little things from my life, grandmom, poverty, dysfunction, worrying about where the next meal was going to be, all that kind of stuff. And I know I see that all the time, everywhere. I see it in the grocery store when they're putting away food because they have too much on the counter and they can't pay for it, all kinds of things. And I just wanted to kind of get that story out of me and plus make sure all the kids who were like Joe felt seen and heard.
It's a beautiful book. Did you feel it was therapeutic writing it as well?
I did. I find a lot of therapy in writing. But yeah, I think that it helped me. What it helped most was processing my grandmom's death. And I wrote it while my mom was dying. So it was really hard to write because I kept wanting to like jet off on death. And Nancy was like, take it back a little bit, like take it back a little bit. But that's just a life circumstance that got in the way.
Well, something that really touched me in the book too, I like how you talked about there are hope planters, hope squashers, and hope restorers. And, that's so true. And I always like the word hope as a former school counselor. And another thing that really hit home to me too was when you talked about Joe not liking to say that he gets a free lunch and how Miss Swan found a way, that they use numbers instead of having to identify themselves. I live in Houston and used to work in the Houston Independent School District. And I was pleased to see a few years ago that all of our schools are 100% free and reduced lunch. So
Yeah.
that, yeah, so that kids don't have to say.
I remember my mom, we qualified for it, but my mom was too proud to, sign up for it. But I remember being in, and they would say it, and I noticed the kids were always trying to mumble it as quietly as possible. And there was this one lunch lady in particular who'd go, "Wah!" And I was like, I just wanted to just like, stop, don't do that to them. You know
Right.
exactly what they said. You see them every day. It was a small school. You know who they are. You know what they're saying. Don't do that to them,
Right. Why put them through that every day?
Yeah, that's harsh.
Yes. Thank you.
Sure.
Hey Lisa, I just want to let you know, one, I love your books. I loved your keynotes, presentation, speech panel for Nerd Camp PA, where
Oh,
you did
yeah.
share a lot of your, personal experiences, and some other people on the panel who I didn't know as well, got to hear from them too. Next up on my list is a recommendation from that panel. What are some books that you've read recently? I know you've been busy writing, but what are some books that you've read recently that you'd like to pass on that I should put on my list before I'm back to school?
Well, here's the clincher on that one is I am trying to also work on my first adult book. It will be nonfiction. It'll be my story, my like whole story. And so I've been reading a lot of books that you would, are adult or therapy related. But I did download because Susan, I can tell you here, I downloaded a couple that I've been wanting to read. So I go ahead and download them. The Dollar Kids by Jennifer Richard Jacobson. She was on that panel. Because I loved her book, what is it, Small Like an Elephant, and Paper Stars. Those were really great books. So I was like, hey, she's got this one coming out. It's new. I also downloaded Home of the Brave by Catherine Applegate because I hadn't read it yet. And Lois Lowry's Tree Table book.
I just
haven't
finished that one today. It was so good.
Yeah.
I read it all today. So good.
See, I had a feeling. I mean, how can you go wrong with those?
Exactly. So good.
Those are three that I have recently downloaded to read when I get out of the weeds of writing.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Do I see Elizabeth Bly?
Yes, I'm here. I love you. I'm out in Naperville for Littlepalooza, so I'm on a street.
Oh, you're fine. I almost had to do that because my sound went out. But I with Microsoft, I said you have 13 minutes to fix me, so I could be on this Zoom with my friend. So
I have a one more if I wanted to give other people a chance, but yeah, Lisa, I'm such a fan of your books. I'm so glad to hear you have another one coming out. And my students really loved Starfish. They love the novel and verse concept. I thought that novel and verse would be a little bit harder for kids to understand because there's not as many words explaining, but that hasn't been the case at all. They absolutely love. I have a whole book club session of novels in verse, and they ask for more of them. Can you tell us what drew you to writing in verse as opposed to in prose?
it was really weird because when I started focusing on writing for children, I lived in Texas and I had this critique group, and we met at Books A Million in Grapevine Mills Mall. Never have a writers group in a bookstore because you will go poor. So I always got there early and I book shopped. And I when I was writing this book, which was it ended up being Starfish, right? But you got to remember, Starfish was originally a young adult, so it was the young adult version of Starfish. It just kept coming out in poetry, so I kept trying to force it into prose, and then it just kept forcing. And I hated it. I hated it. And so I picked up this book at the store called Stop Pretending: What Happened When My Big Sister Went Crazy by Sonia Sones. and it was in verse, and I had never seen verse before. And I was like, that's what I'm writing in. Woo-hoo, I can do it. You know what I mean? Because before then, I didn't realize you could do that. Like it was allowed. Well, now I know anything's allowed. You just have to do it. So, but that's when it all started. But what happens, I find, is that my characters come to me in verse. It's not that I choose verse, it's that they come to me in verse. And I know the other morning, I'd stayed up till like 7 a.m. writing. So I went to bed for a couple hours, and then so of course my brain is still working on this book, and all these, and I woke up with these characters talking from this book that I'm working on, and I was like, oh, hold on, let me go get the computer started and all this. And it was like, they were like, no, not arguing with me. And I say these things, and then I think if anyone didn't understand writers, they would think that's a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. But I I got onto my file from my phone because it was too fast. And so I was telling this one character, I was like, hold on, I got to finish writing what this person is saying. And he's like, no, and so it was kind of funny. And it sounds bizarre, but that is sort of how my brain works. And so I wrote 12 poems on my phone that morning because they just came to me. So when the characters are really flowing and the text is really flowing, I just let them go. I just let them go and let them go where they're going to go. And because this is their story. And so it's never my choice to write in prose or prose or verse. I do have a middle grade historical nonfiction done that I'm going to reweave a few new threads into it. And it is in prose because it came to me in prose. That's the only one that's come to me in prose so far, though. But I don't really choose. They just kind of, I am their puppet, and the characters get to choose what I do. So
I have a question, Lisa. For a writer who is trying her hand at a verse novel, having previously written in prose, do you have any books or resources that you can recommend to learn some of the really essential or basic things about poetry or writing in verse?
let me look. That's why I'm trying to get my phone out here. I am going to look at some books that I bought because I get that a lot, and I wanted to have some resources for kids. Let me see. If I can't find this, I'll give it to E-Train, and he can, because I don't want to take a lot of time looking. But there's a couple of really good, really simple might be in my Kindle books that teach kids or anyone about some basic poetry techniques like enjambment, alliteration, metaphors, similes. I'll have to get that to E-Train. Do you mind E-Train being the median for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't mind. I'd be happy to.
Okay. There's 3 of them, and as soon as I can remember them, it might take me a couple of days because again, I have a deadline in less than a week, but I'll get them to you. But it's basically there's so many books out there that will teach you the basics of poetry. Because a lot of people, I think that novels in verse that I just quit, I do a line break just randomly. No, every line break is for a reason. It's either to emphasize some words that I want to emphasize. It's either to create a rhythm. It's for rhyme. It's for enjambment. It's all those reasons. So any basic, if you could get there's several different poetry definition type books. You know, they talk about haiku, they talk about the golden shovel. There's so many ways, but you do need the elements of poetry. All of my books have the elements of poetry, but then you have the freedom of verse to just make it what you want. And I think, you know, what I like is seeing Carrie Ann Holt, where she will use a variety of mediums to get her message across. There could be some drawing, there should be some poetry, there could be some texting. And that's what I love about free verse and just what I call like montages of different styles of writing. You can have one part prose, one part verse or whatever. And I think what happens is, to me, is that kids love it. You know why? Because there's not these huge chunks of text to read. And because the white space, I think, allows them to have a little bit of a break and a breather from all of the emotional content of a novel in verse. Because I find most novels in verse are jam-packed with hard-hitting, tough topic stories. And you can tackle them in a simplistic way. And I can't remember which one of you said you were surprised because there was less text and that, you know, kids needed more to understand. I think that's the exact opposite of this generation and future ones. They can fill in holes faster than we can. Their minds are different from using technology at a younger age than other generations have been. Plus, I think that it also gives them the freedom to fill in the spaces any way they want. They can say, like with Joe, and at the end, is his mom going to fight for him when she comes back? She going to go to jail? Is the dad going to pop up? Is he going to be able to stay with the Davisons? And the kids can answer those questions either in the poems or between poems. And that space between poems, because there's not always a direct connection from this poem to the next to the next. But they can fill in, they understand how it's flowing together. And I think they're more visual than any other generation. And I think with every generation, they're just going to get more visual. So I think that this kind of medium really helps them to do all that, especially with the white space. White space is crucial. And I know when I'm going back in after I've written something to edit it, see if I can get it any tighter, I'm always trying to do that to get more white space, because I want their eyes to kind of scan over to the white space while their brain is going, oh man, and processing it. So does that answer?
It does. Thank you.
Sure.
Questions?
Anybody else have questions? I have a question if nobody else does, but I don't want to intrude.
It's your show. You can intrude.
All right. My question for you is, well, I have a couple that I had thought of, but all right. So you mentioned that the words come to you as your character's thoughts, but are there any characters that you sort of have to work hard to create? Specifically maybe And Then Boom or Starfish, or does everybody sort of come to you?
That's a really good question, E-Train. I do remember when I was writing And Then Boom, I kept feeling like it needed what, because all I had at first was Hakeem. I didn't have Nick. And I felt like he needed another ally close by. Because Hakeem had more money. I mean, he wasn't like all wealthy, but he had more money. And I felt like I needed someone who was more his poverty level. And it's almost as if, and this is going to sound weird, but again, my process is a little different. I think everybody's is. But I feel like, this is going to sound like really hokey dokey, but I feel like that desire just puts out almost like an audition call. characters to just be drawn to me, like Nick. Like, hey, I fit that. I fit that. You know what I mean? Because I really feel like characters come to me. When I'm thinking about a subject and how I'm going to approach it, like the one I'm working on now, I was trying to figure out how is this going to come, because it's a very, very intense book because of the subject matter alone. And I needed humor. I needed tons of humor to make this book doable for me as a writer, let alone for a young reader. And oh my gosh, I love the parents. I love how hippy dippy they are. I love how the characters all have their names. They have some really unique names, and they just have this way about them that is fun and playful and very, I don't know. I always think of them as like hippies, like modern hippies. I don't know if that's a good enough PC term days. I don't know what anyone calls them these days, but just fun loving, free spirited, and very speak your mind and have fun people. And I feel like once the mom and dad came to me with their interesting way to name children, I was like, there we go. There we go. That's the family to fit the bill for this story. And so Nick did that in And Then Boom. He came to me like, yo, you're looking for this character. Well, that's me. Hire me, kind of, that's how it feels to me. It's not really what is said. So does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Sometimes I'm like, am I connecting? Like, it makes sense in my brain, but my brain is a little. Creatives have different ways of thinking of things, I think.
Right. Yeah.
But you had a second one, you said?
Oh, no, that was it.
Okay. Was there one at the bottom of my screen? Was it Jody who had one? Okay.
When is your is it an autobiography or the one that you had spoke about that's going to be adult?
Yeah, it's an autobiography. Yeah, I've been encouraged to write it by my therapist, by several other people who said, you need to write this. And it's really hard. I've actually started parts of it already, but it's really hard because, it's nonfiction. So, it's even more brutal to write. But at the same time, I feel like I have so many different areas of dysfunction from my family. And I remember my therapist asking me once, she goes, how did it feel being the only mentally healthy one in your family? And I was like, oh, I was? Because just dealing with them made me feel like there was something wrong with me, right? So, but it's just a different that. And there's actually another one that I'm working on that's an adult, which is very kind of British humor, very dark humor. And it's about dead people, but that's another adult book. So my brain goes in. I never work on one book at a time unless I'm on hard deadline. So
is your autobiography going to be in novel and verse or in prose?
I think a mix from what I'm doing. I think I'm going to write for a while about a thing and then write a poem that kind of sums it up. Maybe. I don't know. We're working on that. I'm playing.
Do you have a deadline for that or like a time frame for that one?
No, because I felt like that one needs to come as it comes. Yeah. That's a little different beast.
For someone who has ADHD, I do appreciate novel and verse for those reasons that you mentioned. I appreciate that very much and love your books. So I am so excited that more coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to throw this out there because a colleague of mine read it right when I got back from NCT. I lent her the ARC. and she has been an English teacher in 6th grade, but now she's moving to social studies. She's like, I have to find a way to read this book with my classes. So she's actually going to teach the 5 themes of geography through it. And I think it's a really interesting, like, I hadn't thought of that, but she has a plan. So as soon as she, formalizes it, I'm going to share it with you, because I think it's a really interesting way of using the book in a classroom other than English, right?
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So I just thought you'd like to know. And I love you.
Love you
I'm
too.
going to sign off because my phone is literally about to die. But thank you for writing. Keep doing it. And can't wait for more.
Have fun this weekend.
Thank you. Bye, guys. Bye.
Bye.
A question. I know that your book was chosen as a global read aloud for this coming year, and I've been always give these kind of things a lot of thought. We've been doing that for the past many years. So I'm really just looking at it through the lens of, introducing it to a class of 4th graders. And I'm just wondering if you have any I guess any tips for if there's like a specific way to introduce it that you envision, I guess to launch, to get kids ready to hear.
That's a good question. I think it could go several ways. First of all, I think most people, no matter what their income level right now, are really struggling with grocery bills. I mean, groceries are just sky high, and so you could talk about that, ask the kids, talk to your parents, what's this like for them to have to pay all the bills plus this growing grocery bill issue, right? I've seen, I think I saw something the other day that the average grocery bill used to be like $150 or so, and now it's up to $500-$600. I mean, depending on how many kids you have, depending if you go shopping weekly, every other week, or whatever. And look at those systems where you can give them like monopoly money and show them how this goes. You've got X amount for rent, you've got X amount for heating and air and all that, and you're left with this amount, this little amount for groceries. How do you feed a family of 4 or a family of 5? And now imagine that you lost your income. Just there's all kinds of ways that you can show, how long can you go without a paycheck? How long can you go without food? How far can you stretch $1 for your groceries? Go look at some of the cost of some of your favorite cereals, your favorite after school snacks, and how much that is, because most kids don't know. I did. I was the one who added up the amount every time. Anything that went in the cart, I had to write it down on an envelope and make sure we were tracking so we didn't get embarrassed at the checkout. And so I had always been keenly aware of when, peanut butter went up 25 cents. That's a big deal. That might mean we don't get it, So those kinds of things. I think also one thing that I don't know that kids will notice, I'm hoping they do, is that I never tell you where this is. You don't know what state this is in. You don't know if he lives in a kind of the outskirts in the inner part of an inner city, if he lives in the outskirts, or if he lives in a rural area. You don't know. And the reason I did that on purpose is because I want them to think about the fact that it can happen anywhere and everywhere, and it does. And so that was one of those things that I thought was really important. I worked really hard not to make you think, oh, this is in Ohio or this is in California, because it can be anywhere. And I want it to be like that. Those are a couple. Does that help any?
Yes, thank you. And when you were mentioning about the groceries, it just brought to mind Dicey's song
Oh,
from a
yeah, yeah.
long time ago. And that part that just stuck
Yes.
in my head was, when she had to make, when she fed, she and her siblings had um, um, hot dogs with like a bread wrapped around it. She's like, oh, here's a meal that doesn't need to be cooked. And her teacher, they were doing some activity in school. And the teacher's like, oh, what's the, can you get supper for $1 or whatever it was? And she said, yes. And the teacher's like, oh, no, like teacher put her down and said,
Yep.
you don't know what you're talking about. That's not true. And she so badly wanted to say, I lived this.
Yeah.
It is. But she couldn't bring herself to admit that. And
That's a
I
great
think,
series in general. I love that series, but that particular would be a good pair for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else have questions for Lisa?
I have one more. The tornado. Why did you bring that in as opposed to some other natural disaster? Is there some reason behind it?
Because they're everywhere now. Years ago, because of land development, like for example, in Kentucky, my mom was from Kentucky, they hardly ever had a tornado because tornadoes have to pretty much have flat ground. They don't follow the terrain, right? And so, but once they started what they call like flat topping to do development, then they have more tornadoes. And you could have tornadoes in any state in the country, but flooding, some places hardly ever get flooding. Some hardly ever get an earthquake. Like I live in Indiana, we've had little like point 3 point somethings every now and again. But I wanted a weather event that could happen anywhere, and it could also happen in other countries. Plus, I wanted the fact that all along he talks about how stormy his mom is, and so I wanted how all of the emotion of when that tornado's coming down, he's having these flashbacks about these moments with mom and how chaotic they were. And so he survived her and he survived a tornado. So I felt like they were parallel. They were feeding off of each other, symbolism. And I actually I've been in 4 tornadoes too. So it gave me a little more experience on how to write it. But I also made sure I had looked up before and I double checked it. But there have been people who have survived tornadoes by holding on to trees. Like they were in places where they couldn't find like a ditch, etc. And they would hold on to a tree. Now they almost always did the same kind of thing where they're holding on to it, their legs go up, and they might get all kinds of debris flying against them. A couple of them eventually, right at the end, would be pulled away from the tree. But it is possible for him to survive like that because I'm always looking for the authentic experience. But I felt like it really was the weather version of what he had been like his whole life. Chaotic, swirling, holding on for dear life, everything coming at you at once. You have no power, you have no control as a child, and you end up wounded and alone. And that's that parallelism. I can't say that today. But yes.
All right. Any last questions, comments, concerns? I doubt there'd be concerns. See, I love your book. We were talking we were talking about it before you came on. We've shared experiences when it came to relatability. Yeah, English is hard. We related to And Then Boom. We loved it. We cried. I personally cried when reading it. It's a beautiful book, and thank you for writing it.
Thank you for having me. I just adore you. You were just a dynamo. You're just a little dynamo.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining. Thank you, Lisa, for taking time out of your day, or I guess evening, because it's probably pretty late there.
8:30, 8:36, somewhere in there.
So I hope I can't wait to read all of your stories that are upcoming. I'm probably gonna reread And Then Boom 100 more times. Um, Starfish, I'm not the biggest rereader, but Starfish is the book that I've reread the most as a reader. So
Thank you.
it's a story that Starfish and of course And Then Boom, when you read it again, there's always more that you'll grow to discover, and you'll learn more about the characters each time that you didn't even notice the first read. So I highly recommend all of you read it again. And round of applause for Lisa. Thank you, Lisa Fipps. You are
So
amazing.
much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lisa. You're a wonderful author. Keep at it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Writing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thank you so much.